Welcome, everyone. This is our first official presentation of 2023. We had a presentation last month that was to kick off 2023, and we're happy to start our webinar series for this year. So thank you for joining. This should be a great talk. You'll see Tom there on the screen. He'll be the presenter today. First, a few housekeeping items. This session is being recorded. We will post the recording to the website in a day or two. That'll be a private YouTube channel, so you have to be registered on the PIPMG website to be able to access it. We will mute all the lines during the presentation. At the end, we might be able to bring some people up to speak during the discussion, during the Q&A. We'll see where the time permits, but in the meantime, please add your questions or comments to the chat. And as we go through the presentation, John and I will be monitoring the chat, and we'll bring those questions up at the end for the Q&A session. Slides will be made available on the website after the presentation, so no need to take notes or take screenshots. We will post those in the same place as the recording, so good, easy access on our website. And PDUs, for those who are looking for PDUs, we don't have a PDU code. We will just, when you go into to the PMI website, you'll just add in the presentation title and duration and speaker and that information, and it should qualify for a PDU. Okay, so one more thing, I'm going to show the rest of our 2023 presentation schedule. Let me share a screen here. Okay, so like I said, we had our kickoff meeting in February, and today we're with Tom, and we have a topic, ascending the portfolio optimization maturity curve. Later this month, so 2 for 1 this month, we'll have Claudia Campbell from PMI New Jersey Life Science LCI. She'll be presenting on project management for medical devices and using Agile in device development. And there's opportunities there for pharma and biotech project managers to learn some of these Agile practices and potentially apply them to our daily work. In April, we have a presentation from Cynthia Schaefer at Arcus in the San Francisco Bay Area. And she has been a project manager and alliance manager combined role. And she'll talk about what that life is like as a joint project and alliance manager. And then as a company matures, separating those roles out. And she then went on to become chief of staff. So she can also describe her, how she uses project and alliance management skills and capabilities in her role as a chief of staff. And then we have our conference that's coming up in May, the end of May, and Tom Hallowell and Steve Harrison are organizing that conference. It's around lessons learned, gathering lessons learned in project management. Fun title here, Can You Teach an Old Dog New Tricks? That'll be in London and in person, so no online presence for that one. In June, we have a presentation from Sarah Hudson. She's at Avidity Bio, and she's been through several organizations rolling out decision-making frameworks. So she'll talk about her experience with decision-making frameworks at small and large companies, and some great tips on implementing a more structured decision-making process in your organization. In July, it gets a little, we might move these things around, but we have a great presenter, Jordan Latainer. He's at Trial, I believe it's Trial Spark. And he's focused more on the advanced techniques for drug development. And he'll tell us more about that, kind of a new wave, technological way of progressing drug development. And then Paul Cook at Generate Bio, this is the last scheduled session that we have. He'll talk to us about being a project manager in a primarily research-based organization. So a small life science company that's pre-IND, and how that might differ from project managers who are in the development space. Then you'll see we have some openings towards the end of the year. If you're interested in presenting, or if you have a topic you'd like to hear, please let me know. You can send us an email at info@pipmg.org, or you can reach out to me on LinkedIn. and suggest either yourself as a presenter or a topic you'd like to hear. And with that, I'd like to introduce Tom. I'll take down the screen here. All right, so our presenter today, Tom Nelson, he is a senior program manager at Neurocrine Bioscience that's located in San Diego, California. He is a previous consultant. He's worked at SkySys and Scimitar. He's done some independent consulting as well. He works a lot with project teams, systems, creating efficiencies between the information that we gather and how that's presented out for decision making. And so this is, the project optimization discussion that he's talking about today covers a wide range of the frameworks, methodologies, theory, and so we'll get to hear more about that and pick his brain. Academically, he has a master's in chemical engineering, a PhD in engineering systems, MBA from MIT. He's PMP certified and Smartsheet certified. And so we're happy to have Tom speak to us today. Tom, welcome. I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Yeah, thank you, Joe, and thank you, PipMG, for this opportunity. It's great to be here. And let me go ahead and share my slides here. All right, great. Let me put it in presentation mode. All right, so as Joe said, I'm with Neurocrine Biosciences, and I've been here for a year and a half. I will not be speaking on behalf of Neurocrine. I'll be speaking on behalf of myself, based on my experience and research on this topic. And I've included my personal email here, and happy to follow up with anyone offline after the event as well. So the topic for today is ascending the project portfolio optimization curve. And so let's dive in. Okay, so our objectives for today are, by the end, we would like for you to understand what PPM, PPO, which is project portfolio management and project portfolio optimization is. We'll give you an appreciation of why this is a hard thing to do in many organizations. We'll make you aware of some of the key frameworks, both from industry, from the biopharma industry, and from general thought leaders about frameworks for this. We'll also make you aware of some of the key software tools and their pluses and minuses and situations in which they can be used. We'll have you understand maturity assessment, and we'll go through maturity models specific to project portfolio management. And finally, as many of you on the call, as I am, are project or program managers, our objective is to have you be able to provide better inputs to the PPM, PPO process for your organization. So you may not be in charge of that process, but you certainly, as a PM, are a key contributor of important inputs to doing good portfolio management. All right, so first topic, what is PPM, PPO? But before we get into that, I'm going to reference my favorite new AI tool, ChatGPT, and see what it has to tell us about project portfolio optimization in this case. So if you haven't played around with this tool, I highly recommend that you do it. It's been in the news, and it's for good reason. So I asked it to write a knock-knock joke about PPO. And one of the responses among a few that I got were, knock, knock, who's there? Project portfolio optimization. Project portfolio optimization who? Sorry, I can't optimize your joke portfolio without first assessing your current joke inventory and identifying any areas for improvement. Let's schedule a meeting to discuss further. So one of the things, if you start playing around with this tool, that you'll see is that it really does produce interesting results that are useful. Okay, so moving on. So talking about introducing the topic of project portfolio management, this is a quote, and it actually comes from a book by Richard Bainey and Ram Chakravarti. And Richard's here on the call, so that's wonderful to have him here. But basically, this is a senior executive who said, when I started business school, he basically thought that big organizations had everything figured out, and for the important decision making, the big important decisions that they make. But he said, I was quite surprised to learn that most organizations make decisions in suboptimal ways. So it's I think that there can be a debate about how much room for improvement there is, but most people will agree that there is room for improvement in the sort of high level portfolio decision making that organizations go through. Okay, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on definitions, but I will kind of talk about one, which is what project portfolio optimization is. And this is also from Richard's book. Project portfolio optimization seeks to find that combination of projects and programs that best meets the goals of an enterprise without violating its constraints, which are generally budgetary and human in nature. So PPO is kind of, it fits within portfolio management, which is, the traditional PMI framework of project management nested within program management and within portfolio management. All right, so why is this an important process, and why should organizations get better at it? So one reason is that more and more biopharma companies are growing up. It's been a amazing decade for biopharma. And so the size of portfolios, the number of assets, the number of indications is getting larger. And so as they get larger, it becomes more difficult and less optimal to just use an organic process for deciding about your portfolio. And at some point, you just can't keep all of that in your head as a senior decision maker. Also, there are scarce resources. And so some organizations have more resources than others, but everyone has a limit. And so organized PPM, PPO process helps us, an organization, avoid pet projects and terminate projects when it's prudent to do so, in light of scarce resources. Additionally, an organized PPM process puts external and internal assets on a level playing field. In biopharma, we're all very used to the sort of balance between externally derived technology and internally derived technology. And a formal process helps you evaluate those on a level playing field. PPM, PPO also links a company's strategy to its operations, whereas strategy may ask the question, what should we do from a strategic point of view? Operations ask the question, what can we do? What is the organizational capability? And finally, there are benefits that come from the holistic modeling that is done when you do a formal PPM, PPO process. Doing a formal process really focuses the mind on what are the realistic assumptions around key variables like timelines, probability of technical and regulatory success, peak sales. And that's a prediction, it helps the organization do better prediction. But there are also benefits of learning, being able to do what ifs and basically have an effect of learning, kind of like a management flight simulator for the overall portfolio. All right, so to do good PPM, PPO, there are a number of foundational components that are required. One is the company's strategy, which has to be explained at least in a reasonable level of detail. Of course, there are emergent pieces of strategy, but having that solid core needs to be there. Going around clockwise, as the knock-knock joke I referenced earlier said, you have to start with your existing portfolio. And that's certainly true for pharma companies doing PPM, PPO. You have to know you have to have and know and understand the organizational capabilities. You do need to ultimately use tools. People love to jump to that, but it is an important piece of the puzzle, but it's just one piece of the puzzle. You need to understand and have good decision-making approaches. And of course, you need to understand well the financial constraints for your company. All right, so why is this hard to do now that we've talked about what it is and some of the key foundations? So there are multiple reasons why it's hard to do good portfolio management. One is that, and I've kind of put them into two buckets here. On the left-hand side, I've had a bucket of business and organizational context. We live in an uncertain, volatile, complicated, ambiguous world. And I've referenced the black swan there. We've all been living in the last 3 years through the pandemic, which we're thankfully coming out of, the war in Europe. Those are both events that have added complexity to portfolio management. And that's certainly true for biopharma companies that have been impacted by both of those events. Management has fragmented attention span. There's so many options out there. There's lots of new technology in biopharma, new modalities. There's the events that I referenced earlier. So there's lots of things being thrown at people, and so it can be hard to think about what is essential and what is superfluous. Portfolio management is hard because of getting senior management buy-in about, do we actually need a formal process for doing this? Certain managers' style may be that they don't want this sort of organized process for doing that. And a related point is actually having one or more champions in your organization for a formal process. And even if there is agreement that you're going to have a formal process for PPM, PPO, if coming out of that, if you have priorities, you prioritize certain drug programs or projects over others, how do you communicate that effectively and in a motivating way to the rest of the organization? So the second bucket of why is this hard is over on the right here. And I labeled this portfolio modeling, but basically, there can, even if you have agreement that we should be, that the organization should be doing this type of formal portfolio modeling, there are differences in decision-making approach. There's differences in risk appetite. There's differences in exploring new areas versus exploiting fully the existing opportunities in front of the company. There can be differences in modeling approach. In biopharma, there's early stage assets have a different character and level of predictability than late stage assets. For late stage assets, you can quantify, but the error bars are a lot smaller in terms of understanding peak sales and probability of success, et cetera. So you can have different metrics for early stage versus late stage, and that adds complication to the overall PPM, PPO process. The portfolio itself, there can be just differences about what is the probability of success for among managers who are the ultimate, the C-suite is the ultimate decision maker about whether, big decisions about what's in, what's out in a portfolio. And finally, good PPM, PPO is a dynamic process. It's not once and done. It needs to be able to be updated on a fairly regular basis. Okay, one more point about in terms of foundation and why PPM, PPO is hard, and then I'll transition over into frameworks themselves from pharma and from thought leaders. So the last point here is I'm making an analogy between many of you on this call are in a PM function, project management or program management, and you may in biopharma be running a core team, for example, and in developing an asset with a core team, you have to have sufficiently good inputs from a number of different functions. And I've listed the ones that might be on a typical drug development core team, plus or minus one, depending on your organizational preferences. But if you do not have sufficiently good inputs, there's a weakest link, and that will impact, is very likely to impact your effort to develop a drug. For example, if you do not have strong input from regulatory, just for example, about good information about what is required from the FDA to get your product across the goal line, that is, in you working on faulty assumptions there, that is very likely to have an impact on your ability to bring product to market. Similarly, the analogy here is on the right-hand side for portfolio management, there are also these must-have functional inputs. And starting at the top, corporate strategy, we referenced that earlier, but it needs to be at least reasonably well-defined. Moving around clockwise for R&D, they may be the owners of that assessment of probability of technical and regulatory success. And if you need to have that solidly in place. Business development is important in terms of understanding the external environment and what's available and pros and cons for bringing in external assets. New product commercialization may be the owners of peak sales forecast, for example, which obviously will have an impact on how you assess different aspects of your portfolio. Project and program management, which many on this call are in that function. We pretty much are owners of timelines, which are critical, and I would say program and project risks as well. We're involved with other aspects, but we may own those particular inputs. And finance, of course, understanding the overall picture in terms of costs and benefits. So you have to have all of these functions at a sufficiently high level in order to have good and effective, robust portfolio management. So that the fact that you need all of these things makes it difficult. Okay, so let's transition to the next part, which is around frameworks for PPM and PPO. This is a quote I like. Essentially, all models are wrong, but some are useful. And then keep that in mind as we go through the frameworks. All right, so I'm going to talk about 5 frameworks today. 2 from the biopharma industry, from Pfizer and AstraZeneca, and 3, the rightmost 3 on the bottom, are frameworks from thought leaders, including the framework that Richard and his colleague Ram Chakravarty have developed. So we'll go through and sequence these 5. I did put a PPM book on here as well. I'm not going to talk a lot about that today, but they've certainly have their own framework and thinking on this score. You can see that most of that all of these frameworks are to the right-hand side in terms of quantitative versus qualitative. And I think that's a reflection just of the fact that effective PPM, PPO frameworks that are working and being discussed are at least substantially quantitative. So that's sort of one out as an approach. All right, so the first framework comes from Pfizer. They have published I have links to everything I'll be referencing here in the slide deck, which will be available. But Pfizer has, over the last 10 years or so, developed what they call the 3 pillars of survival. And this is a PK/PD focused framework that is really focused on improving the probability of success, largely in phase 2 development. And the three pillars you can see on the left here are exposure at the target site, binding to target, and expression of pharmacology. And so Pfizer actually saw that in 2012, they had a below industry average success rate in phase 2. It was hovering around 5%, whereas depending on the time frame, and industry average was more in the 20% range. And so they did a deep retrospective, and they came up with these 3 pillars. And then over a period of a decade, they applied this, and they were able to bring their success rate up to above industry average at about 50% for getting through phase 2. And so one could argue also that this spilled over and helped them in the development that they did in the COVID era, both for vaccines and for therapeutics. All right. So similarly, AstraZeneca had a similar situation where they were, really struggling in terms of success in their pipeline. And so they published their first publication that I'm aware of on this topic in 2014, but they have what they call the 5 R's framework. And so 3 of the 5 R's, right target, right tissue, right safety, are all in the medical scientific realm. But they also, when they did the deep retrospective, they realized that given the information available to them at the time, there were actually suboptimal decisions about choosing the right patient populations or choosing the right commercial opportunities. And so they added these 2 for a more holistic framework, which they dubbed the 5 R's. They applied this, and they had similarly good increases in their effectiveness and success rate for clinical development. Okay, so now I'm going to switch over, as discussed, to the 3 thought leader frameworks. And as I've referenced before, Richard, who's on the call, his framework is in the middle here. And I got to see Richard speak at a conference last fall, and be great to hear from him during the Q&A as well. But I chose 3 frameworks for comparison here. I think they're all good and interesting, and that's why I've included them. Kind of as discussed earlier, all 3 of them are have a rigorous and quantitative approach to doing PPM, PPO. There are some differences, which I've tried to highlight in this table. The framework on the left is by Dr. Katakula, and I would say that framework mirrors more of the traditional PMI approach, but with for project portfolio management specifically, and it is a practitioner's guide. Just one example of how this mirrors the PMI framework is that this does actually include a chapter on earned value management, which is not so much used in pharma very frequently, but it is part of the overall PMI framework. I would say Richard's framework is very good, and it to my mind mirrors the more traditional but quantitative MBA approach. It's very thorough and a great framework as well. I did, as you can see near the bottom of the table, put in general levels of maturity that I thought these frameworks, and we haven't gotten to that yet, but 1 is low and 5 is high. And so, there's overlapping ranges of where you would want to be within your organization to try to implement one of these frameworks. I did include the rightmost column here. This is a more layman's introduction to this topic, and it's less complete and descriptive about how to do PPM, PPO, and it's from Michael Menard. So if you want to check that out, you can as well. But again, it's not as complete as the other 2 frameworks, but it is easy and approachable. One last point here is that you can see on the bottom line about years published, there was a sort of flourishing in this field of PPM, PPO kind of 10 years ago. And so there was a lot written and discussed at that time. All three of these references are from between 2012 and 2014. All right, let's move over to, let me just check where we are on time. Okay, good. Let's move over to software tools for PPM, PPO. So this is a quote I like as we're getting into calculational part. I'll just let you read it. Okay. So I'm not going to be advocating for one software platform over another. We may have some folks from either these companies or other software focused people on the call. The one exception to what I just said is that I will advocate that for people for early on in their PPM, PPO journey, what we might call level 1 for PPM, PPO maturity, I would argue for starting with Microsoft Excel or another spreadsheet. It obviously it's got high flexibility, but it lacks specific PPM features. But there is a learning curve for this software and for your organization, and so you want to kind of crawl before you walk, before you run. And so that's the one piece of advice I would give. So the other three pieces of software or companies on the right here are Planisware, Captario, and Enrich, and they're all good, and I all have some level of experience with them, and they have their pluses and their minuses. I would say Planisware is a more extensive and full feature set, and it's been around, I think, the longest, and so as a consequence, as you can see on the bottom row, sort of give it a little higher level of initial maturity for your organization if you want to go that route. Captario and Enrich, they're both newer to the scene. They have a modern interface and feature set, and high visual sophistication as well. So I put a little bit different range in terms of the maturity that might be appropriate if you're considering those options. There are a number of other software options available too. I listed, I guess, 4 others at the bottom here. OnePlan, Smartsheet with added templates, Crystal Ball, and J+D forecasting, which is actually an Excel plugin as well. And links for all, with the exception of Microsoft Excel, the other 7 are all available for you to check out. Okay, let's move over to maturity models for PPM, PPO. So back to my favorite recent AI tool, ChatGPT. This time I asked for a little more sublime response for a haiku about maturity models. And one of the responses I got was, 5 stages we see, maturity models unfold, growth with each degree. So I thought that was appropriate. So I mentioned at the beginning that we're going to talk a bit about maturity models specifically for project portfolio management. And this is the book shown here, actually is about a 100-page book that's dedicated specifically to that topic. And the reference is in the references section. But the quote here from that book basically says that it's typical in the experience of this author or group of authors that that organizations wait for things to become really critical before they, that there's really a burning platform before they invest in improving the project portfolio management skills within their organization. And, you know, maybe more so than other skills, like, for example, execution of project management, straight up project management within an organization. That may be more obvious, may get attention earlier at a less critical or burning platform stage. A couple other high-level quotes from this reference. So it's not so important to know specifically that you're at level 2 of an organization, but what specific actions will you, it's more important to know what specific actions will you be implementing moving forward. And kind of a change management concept here, that improving PPM is really about a series of small steps, not giant leaps. So maturity models in general and for PPM, usually they have 4 or 5 stages, and we'll look at 2 examples here shortly. They provide a common framework, vocabulary, and understanding for an organization. The maturity model that you choose for your organization should start where you're at. That should be on the model canvas, if you will, not where, it should also have where you want to go, of course. It should provide consistent evaluation and measurements, and it should tie to goal setting and evaluation, ideally the annual process that organizations go through. It should apply lessons from change management, really about how do you have lasting change, and how do you actually get the result that you want. And the last point here is that the maturity level for project portfolio management is often correlated with the level of maturity for the PMO overall at your organization. Just one sec. All right, so here's an example of a 5-level maturity model. This is the CMM framework, which was developed originally by Carnegie Mellon in the 90s. And you can see at each, there's a descriptor for each of the 5 levels. For level 1 is initial, processes are unpredictable, poorly controlled, and reactive. Level 2 is managed. So the processes may be characterized for projects, but it is often reactive. Level 3 is defined, where processes have been defined for the organization overall, and there's an attempt to use them. And individual project processes are tailored from the organizational standards. Level 4, quantitatively managed. The processes are measured and controlled across the organization. And level 5 is sort of where you're in full continuous improvement and focus on the process within your organization. This was originally developed for software, but it's been applied in lots of places, including biopharma. So back to the original reference that's for maturity models for PPM specifically. So this book has also 5 levels with a slightly different terms and nomenclature. But the important point here is that it breaks down portfolio management into 6 subcomponents. And you can see those in the rows on the left-hand side. And so knowing how you're doing currently and where you want to go, and for each of these 6 subcomponents, gives you a lot better granularity and gets closer to that desire for what specifically do we need to do to get better. And I'll just reference the 6: portfolio governance, opportunity assessment, prioritization and selection, communications management, performance management, and resource management. So you get kind of this matrix of 5 by 6, and you know where you are now, and you have a path to improve on these subcomponents. All right. So in order to actually increase maturity for your organization, one frame for this is circles of concern, influence, and control. So this takes time to build this capability, like building a muscle. Rome was not built in a day. We saw earlier that Pfizer's improvement in their success took more than 10 years, took about 10 years. We referenced earlier the concept of change management. And at an individual level, because this takes time and concerted effort, sort of the individual value of grit or tenacity is important. I think it's important to have transparency of the maturity model and where you're at to help across, for senior management, but others in the organization to aid progress. And the last point here is about knowing your C-suite. And so that is going to be critical in terms of making those steps from one level to the next on the subcomponents and overall maturity. And a couple of sub-points here about decision-making and biases and where the priorities of the C-suite are. Okay, so the last objective that we had for today was that you as PMs, largely in this audience, would be able to have the background and be able to have stronger inputs to the PPM PPO process. So here's just a not a complete list, but a partial list of the factors that the inputs that PMs provide. And I kind of bucketed them into financial and operational factors, of which timelines, of course, is one of the critical components that PMs provide. And I would say we are responsible for this. We also help facilitate a number of other inputs and costs, spend to the next clinical data readout, for example, and revenue and value, making sure that those inputs do get put into the PPM, PPO modeling and process. There's also strategic factors. So project risks, I would say we as PMs are project and program risks. We're responsible for that. And then we're in a facilitating role for some of these other strategic factors like probability of success, unmet medical need, and sort of life cycle management, or where you would like to take a given compound in terms of next indications. All right. Check how we're doing on time. Doing pretty good. So key takeaways. So just in addition to the detailed information I provided, some key takeaways are just that the importance of PPM, PPO grows as the company and its portfolio grows. We get to that critical point where you get enough critical mass to implement an organized system. The frameworks that and the software that you choose, they're not one size fits all. They should match an organization's capabilities, its attitudes, and its resources. And an appropriately chosen maturity model framework can help drive improvement in PPM, PPO capabilities in your organization. I mentioned the references. Here's the articles related to biopharma frameworks and the books related to thought leaders frameworks. And here are the links for the software as well. And with that, I will conclude. Happy to take your questions. And I included my email here for any follow-up after today's session. Thank you.
Tom, first, I want to thank you. Great presentation, very thorough review, especially for those of us who are building a portfolio management capability in our organization. I myself am at a small organization. We're just starting to assess what capabilities, what frameworks we'll need to set up. And it made me think, some of the books that you referenced, they combine biopharma and, for example, IT industries. Is there a difference in the framework that would need to be applied depending on industry? I know, I mean, biopharma, we like to think we're special because we're so VUCA, but can we apply the same kind of framework?
I think you can. Throwing up your hands and saying it's too VUCA is I think it happens, but the more I think there's a difference between rigor and quantification, and you should always try to be rigorous and organized in your thinking. You may or may not be able to quantify a particular point, but you can think deeply and about it. So I would say it would apply, but happy to have others chime in. I don't know, Richard, do you have thoughts on that topic?
Could you unshare, Tom, please?
Sure. Yes, I can.
Thank you, Tom. This is Richard. Thank you for inviting me to comment on Joe's question. First of all, let me thank you, in fact, for a very nice presentation. With respect to Joe's question, in my case, I work across 4 major industry sectors, and as biopharma, medical devices and diagnostics, consumer care, and agriculture. And I've been able to use the same framework that I developed a number of years ago across all of these sectors, but with certain minor tweaks and modifications along the way. So CREOPAM or any other framework that exists, I would doubt, could be used in a cookie cutting approach across all industry sectors. You have to make idiosyncratic changes and modifications as you go, depending on the frame and scope of the problem. However, if we go to very divergent areas like R&D and IT, I agree with you, Tom, when you say that the framework, whether it's mine or someone else's, it doesn't matter, is still applicable. You just need to make the appropriate modifications based, once again, on the frame and scope of the problem. In IT, for example, these folks don't deal with inherent uncontrollable risks as you and I do in the R&D world in biopharma. Most of the risks that they deal with are largely controllable, and the only thing that they tend to worry about as being slightly out of that domain is compliance risk. But they don't deal with inherent risks in the same way as we do in drug development. I hope that helps, Joe.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Richard.
And with that, I did see a couple questions that came through. John, I'm going to send it over to you to help bring up those questions.
Yeah, sure. So I've got one, Tom, from Edward Jensen. Could you elaborate why a resource planning module will be required in a portfolio tool? It's already in most PM tools.
Yeah, I think my basic answer is that you need good resource planning wherever you have it. And if you have it in a different place and then you bring that information over to the overall planning of your project portfolio, that could work. I think, obviously, if you're using 2 different tools, that provides the opportunity for, broken links, if you will. So I think, in general, my sense is that the software, more and more are going towards including a resource module in order to have it be a one-stop shop and have it be fully integrated. But happy to have, those are my thoughts. Happy to have others chime in as well.
While we're waiting,
additional consideration.
Yes,
for that
Joe, sorry.
is the resource management can be defined in different ways, and in portfolio management, it's more like a years-long outlook on what capabilities you might need to support a portfolio, as well as you're optimizing your portfolio, it's what can you deliver based on your current resources. And so, portfolio is looking kind of longer term, whereas project management might be looking at a more near term, here's the tasks that we have and what resources do we need to execute on the tasks. So there could be, theoretically, there could be a place for both. I think, Tom, your point, ideally, it would be in one solution where you're looking at both a long-term and a near-term.
Okay.
Yep.
Well, I've got a different one here, which is from Nagme Fuladi. I hope I got that name right. So thanks, Tom. But for new technology, small biotechnology, would you still apply POS?
Probability of success.
Probability of success.
Yep.
Sorry.
I personally would. I mean, I think, you know, I'm an advocate of modeling. I think if you even if you have a lot of uncertainty about a range for POS, thinking hard about what, first of all, you know, what is the prior without any other information, what is the probability of success for other similar companies at similar states, assets at similar stages. But I think the short answer is I would say yes. You know, all of this modeling is only an input to the overall decision. The modeling is not the decision. So I think it's a useful exercise, even for early stage, to think about the POS for your project or program, even if it's in terms of a range.
Okay. Are there any other questions? Did you have anything on your chat list, Joe, that wasn't copied onto the everyone chat list at the end?
That's all I see.
Okay, fine. Anybody else got anything to weigh in with? Karen,
It
please.
was great talk, Tom. Karen here. Can I just
Thank you.
talk, you talked about some different systems and the different levels of maturity. Do you have experience of transitioning from one to another as your organization grows? And there's the challenge of like when you move. You know, is it only when you need it, or you plan for the future and you move to another level?
Yeah, good question. You know, I think most of us have been through software transitions on this call, and things often don't go as smoothly as you would like them to. So I think you don't want to. I wouldn't advocate, you know, like 5 software systems, one for each of the 5 levels of maturity. I think you would want to be judicious about when and how to make a switch. But it is, you know, this is not a once and done process. So there is, you know, sort of care and feeding for any system that you are going to use. And so I think, you know, it's just through an organization's lifespan, they may only be talking about 2 or 3 total. But I mean, yeah, you want to think carefully about your situation, how much buy-in, how many, because it is ultimately a resource question about having the right inputs to a model in order to get the outputs that you want. So I don't have a cookie cutter answer other than to say that, you know, you want to keep it a small number in terms of transition. And you can, it's sort of, you can decide how much you're going to bite the bullet at the beginning to go to a more advanced tool and then sort of catch up versus take an incremental approach. So that's the general thought.
Tom, I like
Anyone else?
this.
Can I add a comment to that, Tom?
Yes.
So, Tom, one of the slides you presented I happen to like very much, and that is where you started with plain good old-fashioned Excel on the left-hand side of your chart, and then you had Planisware, Captario, and Enrich. And the reason I applaud you for doing that is because I have come across far too many organizations who are not only intent on talking about portfolio management, but spend little or no time talking about the veracity of the data that they use for the purposes of portfolio management. The reason I'm so hung up on this topic is that it doesn't matter how bad your data is. If you put bad data into the most expensive PPN software system that you can afford, you'll get junk coming out of the other. Now, admittedly, it'll be colorful junk, but it'll still be junk. So I would argue that depending on the state of maturity of your organization, start simply with Excel. And once you have actually mastered the discipline of decision analysis, where you can attest to the veracity, the truth. It doesn't have to be correct, but it has to be believable and defensible. If you can attest to the veracity of your data, then as you mature and you outgrow good old-fashioned Excel, then yes, go buy something that's more affordable and more expensive and can do a lot of the grunt work that you'd like to avoid yourself, and that's all well and good. But I find far too often that people are willing to spend huge sums of money on PPM software systems and pay little or no heed to the quality of the data that they're putting into those systems. Your commentary?
Yeah, that's a great point, Richard. And that was sort of the intent of calling out Excel at the start. And I agree. I think a lot of software spend is wasted, and certainly PPM within biopharma is not an exception to that.
Mm-hmm.
I want to add one thought to that, and Richard, totally agree. Where we're talking about Excel and its flexibility allows an organization to understand the inputs that they want to include in their more mature system. So it's almost a trial, a trial run. And Tom, you said walk, crawl, run. It's almost like that's the walk, and then you jump right into run. It's almost a walk, run. Because when you do define those inputs that you're going to use, you will evaluate the PPM system using those criteria. Does it have, do we want to use MPV? Do we want to use IRR? Do we want to use ROI? Any strategic criteria that you want to use, define those first, and then look for the tool that either allows you to customize to include those or already has those criteria in place.
Yep, great point, Joe.
Okay. Well, is there anything else from anyone?
Perfect timing, because we're right at the hour.
Joe,
Yep.
we're coming up on our finish time.
Yeah, thank you, Tom, again for joining us and great presentation. You can reach out to Tom on LinkedIn, and if you're here in the San Diego area, we'll be at happy hour tonight, so you can join us there.
That's right. Yep, absolutely. Yeah, thank you, Joe. Thank you, PipMG. Really appreciate the opportunity.
Pleasure.
And thanks everyone in the audience as
Thank you
well.
very much.
Have a great day.
Okay.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Okay, bye-bye.